Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Transport Topics webinar. My name is Sue Hensley, and I'm the publisher of Transport Topics. I'll also be serving as your moderator for today's program. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us. We look forward to providing some helpful information and insights that you can put to use in your own business operations. That's the mission of Transport Topics and what we strive for in this informative webinar series. The title of today's webinar is 10 Actions You Can Take to Avoid Skyrocketing Insurance Premiums. And we're joined by 4 esteemed executives from insurance companies: Aon Risk Solutions, Attic RRG, Cottingham and Butler, and TrueNorth companies. Today's panel will be moderated by Don Osterberg, Safety Advisor for SmartDrive and former Senior Vice President of Safety, Security, and Driver Training for Schneider. Don will introduce you to all of today's panelists in just a moment. And we will begin our presentation after I tell you a little bit about a few housekeeping items. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties with either the audio or video portions of this program, you can call the following number for assistance: 1-800-785-5623. Again, for technical assistance, that number is 1-800-785-5623. And you can follow the presentation today via the slide deck on screen, and while this is taking place, please feel free to submit any questions for our speakers. You can go to the ellipse icon at the bottom of your screen, and when you click on it, a box will pop up where you can type your question, click send, and it will be submitted. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and we will do our best to answer all of your questions. The start of 2020 has been chaotic, to say the least. This is on top of rising insurance premiums and increased nuclear verdicts. While most fleets experience double-digit percentage coverage increases, what can you do to manage your premiums, reduce your liabilities, and protect your fleet for future growth? From improving your safety profile to partnering with your provider and much more, these 4 insurance experts will share their experiences and discuss what actions you can take to manage your premiums and get 2020 back on track. So Don, I'm going to turn things over to you to introduce our panelists.
Well, thank you very much, Sue. I appreciate that. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on the time zone that you're all dialing in from. Special thanks to Transport Topics as well as SmartDrive for sponsoring today's webinar. I'm very excited for the opportunity to listen to these experts in their field to talk about these critical subjects. So I'll provide a very, very brief industry overview of kind of what the trucking industry is seeing as it relates to insurance premiums. That's probably a Captain Obvious statement, because I know many of you who have dialed in are seeing those things. We'll listen to our experts. We'll summarize. There's actually going to be more than 10 actions if you're taking copious notes, but we'll try to highlight the salient points as we go. And then we'll take questions. And much like Sue mentioned, the mission for Transport Topics, I very pragmatically always assess success in something like a webinar like this is that the listeners will do something new or different based on something that they hear today. I've had the opportunity to preview what our speakers will talk about, and I think there's a very rich content. So I'm going to guess that many of you will find that easy to identify things that you can do to improve your position as it relates to insurance. I want to go to the next slide, please, Erica. As Sue already mentioned, certainly 2020 has been a very tough year for a host of reasons. And if you look at the graph on the right, it shows truck insurance premiums have increased 42% since through 2020 to 2018. I'm going to guess for the carriers that are dialed in, your rates with your customers haven't gone up anywhere near 42% during that time frame. And as a result, the financial stress on carriers, many of you read as I do, of carriers who are failing in the industry financially and are citing skyrocketing insurance premiums and nuclear verdicts and cost creep in settlement, claim settlements as being contributors to the financial stress that the industry is facing. There's a host of other externalities that are undoubtedly challenging and in deriving what we're seeing in terms of nuclear verdicts, claim settlements, and insurance premiums. The negative industry safety trend certainly hasn't helped. Ultra-high service expectations, deteriorating infrastructure, and a host of other things are contributing to that without a doubt. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker today. If you'll go to the next slide. Joe Darby is the Director of Risk Control and Transportation and Logistics for Aon, and responsible for motor carrier safety and operations management, crash prevention, work comp loss prevention, and FMCSA regulations compliance. He works with trucking companies to manage their total cost of risk and advises clients on how they can be prepared and to be a preferred partner with the insurance carrier. So without further ado, Joe, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thanks, Don. Sue, thanks for everything today. So appreciate the time to be here today, and everybody, I know how busy everybody is. So kind of what I'd like to talk about is some practical things that we do at Aon as a group, and I do personally with carriers to prepare them for either renewal or marketing their programs, just as they go through that minutia day-to-day, what do you do to prepare? Don said Captain Obvious. I think that's that second point down there. Everybody's shaking their head and saying, yeah, if you could just reduce your frequency and severity, life is good, right? But knowing that and thinking about that frequency, those common things, and some carriers have done a pretty good job of controlling that frequency stuff through the systems and trainings they put into place. But it's important to not take your eye off the ball of that severity. You know, knowing when severity is going to occur potentially within your organization and how you're going to mitigate those types of crashes too. There are plans around mitigation plans around severity as long as that, along with that frequency stuff. So again, that's really the overall goal. Everybody on the phone, right? You know, you're going to hear from Ken and Matt and Chris and Don already kind of hit on that and why we're all here today to reduce collisions, get everybody home safe at night. Let's step back to that continuous action plan. That's fine. Either slide works. That continuous safety action plan. So we think about having a plan. So, and please, if you're not doing this now, start today, start tomorrow, and just organize the thoughts that you have around what mitigation, what plans you have in place to prevent bad things from happening. And if you're going to work, if you have a new initiative that you're going to work on, to track those and keep them all in one place. And then as you look at your losses, your history, and you go back and you look at that from the claims folks, that you're putting a plan in place to improve those things and you're documenting it somewhere. The world is so busy. We all have a million things going on. Probably half of us have 2 or 3 windows open up right now. And when it comes time for that renewal or you're talking to those insurance folks about all the good things we do, sometimes we forget it. So it's really nice to have all that stuff in one place. And that's that continuous safety action plan, and keep it updated on a regular basis and put everything in. Don't be afraid if it's the barbecue or if it's that new video system. And speaking of safety technologies, working around safety technologies is so important these days. You know, we're being sponsored today by SmartDrive. Video wasn't that long ago that videos and cameras and all those technologies were kind of a strange thing in the cab. Now it's become part of the cab. It's part of our culture within safe operations. For the most part, everybody's going that direction, or they've gone that direction. And that conversation with the insurance folks is, do you have a system? What's your system? It's not, are you thinking about it? So really that's a bit of an expectation these days. And if you don't have a video system, a good reason why or how you're replacing that. But another part of that video that we need to have an answer for, and Don was talking about those takeaways, what are we doing with that information? Do we have a plan for that information, and what are we doing with it? Because the underwriters are asking that. And then think about the driver himself, besides the vehicle, you know, what kind of readiness testing are we doing? There's a lot of things out there where we can, you know, it used to be we'd put our eyes on the drivers every day. That's pretty hard to do anymore. There are some fitness for duty apps that are out there and some of those kinds of things that can tell how you know, what reaction times are if they're ready to operate the vehicle, and along with all that, the good wellness stuff. Go ahead and we'll go to the next bullet. And then I think about is we're putting this all together and we're stacking everything up. make sure that when you're preparing for really your renewal that you meet ahead of time and think about who is going to represent and who best represents us as an organization safety-wise. And I can tell you that sometimes that's the safety director, or in some organizations, the risk manager. But for me, some of the most passionate people that really care about what's going on in the organization is that top leadership. If it's the owner, if it's the GM of that part of the organization, that top leader has that passion. Sometimes it's not, but a lot of times it is. It's important that they're able to access and talk to those insurance folks and express their goals and how they're going to make things happen. Don't be afraid to share, again, those experiences and how you're going to articulate all those good things that you have. I think I've got one more point up there, and that's, we've got some insurance folks. I work for a risk management organization. We're not an insurance carrier, but we're a broker that helps people out. But when I see, and I made this mistake was I was a young safety director, not always taking advantage of working closely with the insurance folks and the insurance safety folks, the insurance underwriting folks, when they wanted to give input. Take advantage of that stuff. A lot of times it's free. One of the benefits, besides getting some of that free and that fresh set of eyes coming in, I think is when it feeds the other direction too, that the underwriters understand your pains, how you've improved, and they want to be part of your organization because they start feeling important as an important partner to you. So making sure that you're taking a part of that and working together with your insurance carrier. And then, I think what we're all trying to do is point all these things so that we're a preferred risk, right? We want to be that preferred risk, your organization. Be proud of what you're doing and don't be afraid to tell people about it. Don't be shy. Say, we have done these things. This was an area that we've improved upon, and this is how we got there. And keep pushing that direction so we keep trying to be the best trucking company we can be. Don?
Joe, that's some helpful insights, and I was pleased to hear you talk in your Captain Obvious bullet about not only crash frequency, but crash severity. And I talk with carriers often who frequency, of course, is relatively easy to measure. There are a lot of variables that influence severity, the same crash in different jurisdictional areas. We know where the jurisdictional hellholes are and so on. A lot of carriers put severity in the too hard box and rely on, if we reduce crash frequency, by extension we'll reduce some number of high severity crashes. But I think you rightly called out by really trying to understand the elements common in the highest severity crashes, and we're really actively managing both frequency and severity. I think that's helpful for all carriers to think that way. You made a comment about technology, and I think there's often a misunderstanding with some of the folks that I interact with in the industry that if FMCSA doesn't require a particular technology, that they can't be viewed negatively for not using it. In your view, has there been a de facto standard of care that has emerged as it relates to some of the technologies that are available out there? And if you're not going to invest in those technologies, you need to have a very good explanation for why not and what you're doing in lieu of the benefits that could accrue from that technology. Any further deeper thoughts on that you have, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely, Don. And there are carriers, again, there is an expectation because, the FMCSA, we've always gone above, right? The standards that we've had above there are carriers that will say, as long as you meet this minimum, we're going to hire you and we're going to give it a shot at you. But most people want to have some experience. Most of the industry is going to expect greater experience. And that goes with the technologies too, because drivers begin to expect companies also to protect them. Now, there are some drivers that are adverse to this, but to cameras, to the following distance and lane departure, until they get used to it. And then the drivers start to be, they gravitate to those safe carriers because they want to work for somebody that wants them to be successful in their job too. So absolutely, I think those expectations are there. to go well beyond FMCSA regulations. If that responded properly to your question.
It absolutely did, and I like the fact that you talked about not only protecting the motoring public, but protecting the driver, our people, our drivers that are in the truck. I appreciate your thoughts and insights. Let's move right along, if we would. The next up, Ken Griffin is the President and Chief Executive Officer of American Trucking and Transportation Insurance Company. ARRG is a captive insurance company and writes liability policies for mid to large size motor carriers. Ken, take it away. Are you there, Ken?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Take it away, my friend.
Okay. Thank you, Don, and thank you, Sue, and Transport Topics, and also thank you to SmartDrive for sponsoring this webinar. You know, this is well. Before I get into my stuff, I'd also like to thank America's truckers, big and small, trucking companies, drivers and contractors. The industry in my 20 years in dealing with trucking and being in trucking is so underappreciated by our nation and our leaders. It's really disappointing. Trucking is the backbone of our economy. I think that the fact that our trucking companies have, for the most part, been working day and night through the COVID-19 pandemic we're in proves that, and we need to take advantage as an industry to change things for the better. One of the things my mom has always told me is, Ken, you know, you can't sweat the things you can't control. Well, tell a trucker that. You can't sweat the things you can't control, and you might get punched. The reality is you've got to sweat the things you can't control, and you've got to figure out a way to control more of your own destiny. Really, the relying upon yourself is the best medicine in a lot of cases. One of the biggest frustrations I hear from motor carriers on telephone calls every day is, why are my rates going up when I have great loss experience? I haven't had a loss above my deductible, or I haven't had a big loss in years, but my rates are going up multiple double digits every year. I think you need to understand, to answer that question, you need to understand a little bit about what motivates insurance companies and insurers, how their decisions are made in pricing, and what information do they really use in determining where to price a particular risk. Now, the big companies understand that, and they have a little bit more ability to control their own destiny because of the volume that they bring to the table. They can take much larger retentions or be self-insured, create their own captives and so forth. But what do the smaller trucking companies do? What can you do out there besides some of the things that the panelists today will talk about? Sorry, in dealing with insurance premiums, okay? So one of the things that ADIC did in 2002 when we were formed was we decided, let's try and figure out what are the areas of control that we can exert more of and create an opportunity to perform better when it comes to commercial auto coverage. So one of the aspects, let's go back. In general, insurance premiums are a factor of a number of things. First, the interest of the insurer to make a profit. Insurance companies are not out there. They're not nonprofit organizations. They all have capital that needs to be invested appropriately to make a certain return. So when you understand that, if your insurance company has shareholders to please, I think you're in a better position to understand what motivates them to make their decisions. Insurance company or insurance coverage is also a factor in determining what the price you're paying. For example, limits. Are you buying the minimum limits? Are you buying excess coverage? what is your self-retention if you're large enough to have a self-insured retention, and what deductible do you take? The loss performance of the entire book of business of the insurer is a major factor. So all of the book of business within an insurance organization needs to perform well for the company to return a profit to their shareholders when they write the business. And sometimes insurers have, and most insurers have, lots of lines of coverage. So it could be that one line of coverage may bring down another line of coverage and result in an increase across a number of lines of coverage. So you need to understand what your insurer is, who you're working with, ask a lot of questions, have your retail broker ask a lot of questions about what it is that the insurance company does. The operating expenses of your insurer also are important. Some of the costs associated with insurance policies can vary pretty largely. So it's good to understand where those costs are. And then, of course, loss performance of the individual insureds. So let's talk a little bit about the book of business. I don't recall in my time ever being told by our traditional insurance companies who the other motor carriers were that were being insured by their company. And even though you can't control that, you probably should understand that. Is their business looking for small motor carriers that have outstanding performance records, best practices, all the latest technology, or are they out there writing business at a high premium because those insurers are not doing those types of things? So you don't want to be involved in the latter insurance program when you are more like the former, the original group, which is doing everything right. And so trying to find out what the book of business is that your insurer is after is very important. To the extent that, and there are plenty of alternatives out there where you can provide more input on who your partners are. And when I say partners, it doesn't mean that you're investing with these partners. It means that you are partnered with another motor carrier in that book of business, and that other motor carrier has the ability to impact overall your performance and vice versa. So getting to know those folks is important. And one way to do that, and all of the brokers on the call, Joe, they all have access to captives. Attic is a captive, and what that means is we are capturing like-minded motor carriers that have certain safety and risk attributes, certain driver performance criteria, certain technologies, those types of things. So if you can narrow it down to a group of carriers that look a lot alike, the hope is that that book of business will perform better than a book of business that is a bunch of different motor carriers together. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only way to go. Obviously, we need the big insurance companies to provide coverage. But as a motor carrier grows from 50 to 100 to 150 to 200, there's an opportunity to take more control of your own destiny, and you need to look at that. So one way is looking at the group of insureds that you are insured with and making sure that those are sound carriers and having some level of control over that. And you can gain that through alternative risk solutions such as captives, okay? As you grow your business, you also have the right or the ability to look at a higher deductible. Most of the motor carriers that are on this webinar more than likely cannot self-insure. And so the next best option is evaluate your financial ability to take more of the risk at the bottom end of every loss to control your loss performance, to take on that exposure. That is a good thing for an insurance company to have. They understand that you have now what we call skin in the game. If you have skin in the game, your insurer can rely upon you taking steps that were in your best interest, which ultimately is in their best interest. Okay, so taking on a deductible as you grow can provide more control over your own destiny and can help you with your premium costs. Looking at your overall policy limits, limit discussions are probably an annual thing for most 200 to 300 trucking companies. You know, how much limit should I have? And it's a really difficult question, and really there is no magic answer to it. But how you take that limit can have an impact on the performance of your primary policy. If you take a $5 million policy limit, typically it's going to be a primary policy layered up with some excess coverages. The challenge that creates is you have your excess carriers who have different motivations than your primary carrier, which has different necessarily motivations than the motor carrier has. And there are pressures that build upon the primary carrier and the motor carrier to make decisions that they may not necessarily make if they could control the full limit. So one area to look at is in the captive alternative market is finding out or looking to change the excess relationship into a reinsurance relationship. Okay, so you have your primary coverage. If you bump that primary coverage to 2 million, 3 million, or 4 million, and you're in a captive, the captive isn't going to be able to cover the entire 4 million limit. They're going to need reinsurance. But the captive has the ability to control the entire limit and then just seek reimbursement from a reinsurer. So rather than the excess carrier pushing down on a primary carrier, you have a reinsurer that's supporting the claims defense strategy rather than pushing it. That can create issues related to taking a loss that may be a $200,000 loss into a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 loss for your primary carrier because the excess is saying we got to get it resolved. So looking at the excess relationship, changing it from an excess environment to a reinsurance environment through a program is something you should consider when you are taking your limits higher as you grow your companies. So Joe started out and talked a little bit about safety programs and getting support from your insurer. It's very, very important for a trucking company trying to grow its business to get as much support from its insurance company in terms of loss control, safety best practices, and things like that. When you are part of a captive organization and you have the ability to control more of who your partners are, the synergies are much greater. And the motivations to provide technological advancements and support are really different than with a traditional insurer. The traditional insurer, of course, wants you to perform the best that you can, but they're not in a position to be able to actually fund loss control initiatives for their insureds like a captive or a group program that can do it, because again, the motivations are different. the shareholders in the big insurance companies are, the insurance company has an obligation, first and foremost, to them. And that's great. We need them. But when you want to control more of what you do so that your outcome on your insurance program is improved, then you need to look at ways to handle loss control. Claims management, this is the last point I'll make, claims management it's so difficult these days, and I think Joe and maybe a couple of the other speakers later will talk about early resolution of claims. It's very critical to have a quick resolution in claims, and I think to do that, the motor carrier has to be involved. Even on the smallest ones, and we're talking $10,000 to $15,000 soft tissue injuries, the motor carrier needs to be involved in what happens there. But we all need to learn that to work together and to get this done at the most reasonable price possible or resolution. We need to look at early resolutions. And I think that a motor carrier driven captive can understand that and work in that environment better, which provides additional control over the claims destiny, which obviously is an important part of the success of any insurance policy. So in conclusion, it's tough, and I would really say it's really an unfair environment for the mid to small trucking companies, because pricing is really out of your control. We need to strive to gain more of that control through ways that we've talked about, and ultimately that is how you're going to improve your insurance outcomes, is through that control. So with that, Don, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Ken. And one of the things, of all the things that you talk about, is sometimes I think, especially small to perhaps mid-sized carriers can feel as if they're alone and unafraid out there. One of the benefits of the captive is, as you described, kind of the group best practices, so they can cross-pollinate ideas and really help one another to improve not only the individual carrier's performance, but the entire captive. So there's some great insights. I appreciate it. Let's move right along. Next, we got Matt Rocci, who is the Vice President of Operations and Risk Solutions for TrueNorth. He has over 12 years of claims and risk solutions leadership experience working with clients, insurance carriers, and strategic partners. Currently leads TrueNorth's Risk Solution team, which is focused on driving value to clients in claims, safety and loss control, strategic communications, and technology. Matt, take it away if you would, please.
Thanks, Don, and appreciate the intro, and also, again, thanks to Transport Topics and SmartDrive for including us today. So today, my focus will be around really the action you can take to avoid skyrocketing insurance premiums from a claims management standpoint, and really how your trucking company can be creative, mitigating past, current, and potentially future losses around claims, and again, being creative with how you mitigate those losses. My experience before coming to TrueNorth 5.5 years ago was as an insurance carrier adjuster and manager. So claims management is really a passion of mine, how we can continue to innovate, drive value, and really look and possibly find some of those dead dollars or compress those dollars regarding a claim that you may not realize are sitting there to boost your bottom line. So with that, regarding boosting your bottom line with dead dollars, I want to focus first here on subrogation efforts. Whether your trucking company has a dedicated claims resource or your claims manager is maybe part of a job description for an individual who wears multiple hats, potentially in safety, claims, or HR, the main focus usually after, especially a tractor physical damage claim, is getting the truck repaired quickly, getting the driver back on the road as soon as possible. Because as we all know, the industry's most valuable asset is the truck driver. So unfortunately, what we see many times is subrogation is often an afterthought, and there's little effort from time to time to pursue the at-fault party. And even if the at-fault party is pursued, some trucking companies, I'd say very few trucking companies have dedicated subrogation specialists that can really help maximize your loss of use, loss of revenue, and and really understand and appreciate the subrogation statutes across the country and how do you use those to your advantage. And as part of that as well, on the subrogation side of things, making sure that, as we've talked about, claim documentation, making sure that you document early and often, and many times using cameras or otherwise is a good way to do so, and making sure that you bolster your investigation on the front end, which will increase your likelihood of subrogation recovery on the back end. So as we look at with subrogation, really, I think one of the best opportunities we have right now, especially in light of the fluctuations within the trucking industry with freight, I suggest pulling a report and really determine how successful are you with subrogation. It's a pretty simple equation to gauge how you're doing. It's looking at the dollars recovered divided by the dollars paid. And so based on the first bullet here, the National Association of Subrogation Professionals really cite that about 25 to 28% of your physical damage dollars paid are likely recoverable. And many trucking companies we often see and work with are in the 10 to 15% range. So there's some considerable dollars that are sitting there, many times on closed files. And with that, so many of the states have statute of limitations for recovery up to 4 and even 6, 7 years, depending where you're at. So if you can imagine looking at some of those dead files that are maybe sitting there in a file cabinet or maybe Excel database, and finding some untapped potential on some dead files really infuse the bottom line during this time. In our experience over the past few years is we've been able to see many of our clients bring back tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from dead files. So it's really helping shift your mindset from being the plaintiff attorney and shifting your mindset from the defense side to the plaintiff side to temporarily receive some reimbursement for the damages you're entitled to. Additionally, on a go-forward basis, you likely will learn quite a few things through this exercise and help train you and your staff for future subrogation opportunities. And there are a few reliable third-party subrogation companies that really have expertise in subrogation and also transportation that are heavily focused and working with quite a few trucking companies. So I think a huge opportunity here. Pivoting to the next set of bullet items regarding advocacy-based approach around workers' compensation claims. This is something that we found to be impactful to our clients over the last 4 to 5 years. As we know, workers' compensation claims can maybe sometimes lead to an adversarial relationship between the injured worker and the employer, and possibly lead to unnecessary litigation and increased costs. But using the advocacy-based approach, which really, again, got some traction 4 to 5 years ago, really helps enhance the injured worker's experience, which in turn can really have a tremendous impact on your program results related to workers' compensation. Because at its core, workers' compensation is really in the business of taking care of people. Sometimes we often forget that. As Joe mentioned earlier, drivers and injured employees want to work for their companies. They want to work for companies that are invested in them, and that's what really drives them. And so using the advocacy-based approach really helps you think about how to use the empathy related to and working with that injured worker, because unfortunately, especially during this time, they may not be able to go to the physical therapy visit or the occupational health meeting or occupational health doctor. So if you can continue to work with that injured worker, communicate regularly, we think that will have some traumatic impacts on your workers' compensation results. And lastly here, I want to focus on early settlement of litigated files. In the current climate and really just 8 short weeks ago before COVID hit the radar, the frequency and severity of claims, as we discussed early on, has increased, many times driven by medical costs, litigation, injuries. So with COVID in the last 8 weeks, we're seeing historic unemployment numbers, and I think it was just yesterday, the Department of Labor announced that the U.S. economy lost about 36 million jobs in the last 2 months. Unfortunately, that's a grim number. In this last week, I believe, was an improvement compared to the last 8 weeks, and we are currently looking at unemployment rates really the highest since the Great Depression. That said, it is likely that some of the plaintiffs on the other side of the fence may be more motivated to settle their claims quicker and possibly at a fairer price. So recommend talking with your adjusters and your defense attorneys to canvass your open files and see if you can get any traction related to a claim settlement. Plaintiff attorneys, I've seen some ads from them and some online resources. They're recommending that their clients hold off on settlement if possible. That said, we've heard many insurance carriers and TPAs have had some tremendous success in settling claims over the last 45 days. So again, recommend diving in a little bit to those files that have maybe been open for some time. Maybe they've been a little bit stale. You may get the opportunity to settle that claim and move it off your desk. So as I wrap up, there's several different techniques and strategies that you can really look to deploy around claims management to help skyrocketing insurance premiums and help you be proactive many times when claims is in a reactive environment. So we found that these few to be extremely impactful, along with utilization of other technologies that can really drive some efficiencies to your business and impact your bottom line. Turn it back to you, Don.
Matt, well, thank you very much for those insights. And it was interesting as you hit the theme of subrogation. In my experience, it's a little bit of kind of skunk work, and it requires a lot of repetitive dialing for dollars and other things. And a lot of folks do put it in the too hard box. But I think the point you've made is that there's real dollars there that you can transition from dead dollars into real dollars to help offset other claims that you might see. And also the point on early settlement, I've come to believe, unlike wine, claims don't get better with age. So I think that is sage guidance. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I did have a quick question before we transition to Chris. There's been a lot of talk as it relates to nuclear verdicts and the effect that they have on driving the increase, cost creep in insurance premiums, that tort reform that may put caps on punitive damages, as an example, may be a solution. If I could ask you to look into your crystal ball, do you see meaningful tort reform in the near term, or is that more a pipe dream in the near term and not something we should be relying on? The likelihood that it's going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and as far as the near term, that may be a pipe dream. But what I can tell you is that tort reform is a tier 1 initiative. The ATA has actually assembled an insurance task force around tort reform, and the initiative is being led in partnership with the transportation insurance industry, many different industry affiliates and industry groups. So we had some good momentum heading into COVID and have hit kind of understandable pause for a period of time. We all understand this is a critical issue for the industry, and we really can't take a back seat. With that said, though, at a federal level, there may be it may be a pipe dream in the nearer term, but I can tell you there's been some considerable push in individual states across the country, Iowa, Texas, and a few others, that we can maybe start chipping away at some of the tort reform and some things such as phantom damages and others. So again, I know ATA and Chris Spears made some considerable efforts in really steering legislation really in the favorable direction of the trucking companies across the country, and I know it's definitely it's highly focused over the next couple of years.
Well, I appreciate your insights on that. Thanks. And then transitioning to our final speaker today, Chris Vogel. Chris serves as the Senior Vice President for the Transportation Group at Cottingham and Butler, leading the firm's transportation and logistics business. Chris is a trusted advisor. One of the largest collections of trucking accounts in the nation. He has extensive experience in risk financing, large deductible programs, SIRs, and plays a key role in starting and managing Cottingham and Butler's 7 exclusive trucking captives. So, Chris, if you would, take it away, my friend.
Well, thank you, Don, and I appreciate everybody's thoughts that they've shared this far, and I'll try to bring it home. You know, I'm excited to be with the group. I think, you know, we're all seeing some common themes, and what I really want to drive home is what I'm seeing as the main differences between the great trucking companies that are getting better than average results and the average fleet that's feeling the most pain right now with the topic at hand. By far, the most successful companies in this area are those that treat the risk management insurance program like a business. They're actively engaged, they're actively in the game. You know, I use on the slide, you see there's an iceberg, and I want to focus. You know, I think a lot of people look at their renewals and see what's above the water and what's in front of us, and it stops right there, right? And I think what we need to consider, and what the people that are doing this best are doing, is focusing on everything else, which is the much larger object and the much larger opportunity that lies below the water. And everything we're going to talk about today, or that I'm going to talk about, revolves around a mindset that this is part of your business. It has to be managed aggressively, and thought about strategically. And if you think about this, insurance for almost everyone falls in top 4 or 5 expenses. And if it only comes to mind and only becomes a priority 90 days before your renewal, you're going to get market level results, which right now I think it's fair to say suck for a lot of people. And what I want to share is what I see the best of the best doing to actively manage this and this issue. And I'm going to show you on the next slide in a little bit later, an example of the results from one of the sets of a control group we have that's totally bought in and has taken a lot of this advice and used a lot of things that we're talking about today. So the contrast, as you're going to see, is incredible. It's quite amazing. But the first point, that you see on the slide, it starts with technology. And everyone that stays in tune with technology or is a student of technology knows that this is evolving rapidly. And students of the game know computers, cameras, all the other gadgets are able to see, process, and react faster than a human. And, the best part about them is they aren't easily distracted like most of us. And as technology continues to evolve rapidly, the companies that embrace this and get ahead of the tech curve, so to speak, and are very aggressive with their investments are yielding far better results. And if you don't think or if you don't see the difference right now or don't view it as significant, I'd tell you to wait a couple of years, because the gap's going to continue to widen, and you're going to see a gap of monumental proportions between those that were the early adopters and those that were a little bit more passive. And the bullet points there, a couple of considerations to think about is there's a lot of technology, a lot of types of technology, and our sponsor today, SmartDrive, has a great product. But when you look at the different types of technology that SmartDrive hits on, is you've got pre-accident. A lot of technology tries to help you prevent the accident. You've got post-accident, which says, hey, what happened? What can we do to mitigate it? And what resources or tools or data is available to us to go manage that claim, like Matt was talking about. And then there's everything in between. And you have to manage the metrics and hold people accountable. And it starts with everyone understanding the goals and making sure they align with the proper incentives. And we've all got really good examples of this, and I'll use one example of a large fleet that I work with who invested in the camera technology, and they saw their accidents reduced by 40%. And the question there is, well, what caused that, and what was the action that they took? And a lot of it is addressing the risky behaviors. They were able to identify the folks that were triggering the cameras and triggering the events, so to speak, and they spent a lot of time coaching them. I'm a big fan of not just replacing people and going out and hiring someone that you don't know may or may not be better than the person that's in the seat, but taking the person that you have, that you believed in, that had the track record to get hired, and coaching them up. And that particular fleet, as a large deductible, they saw their costs drop by about 68%. And the best part of all that is when you look at the claims that came in, almost 50% of those claims were not at fault. We have professional drivers that drive these trucks, and these guys are better than most. And when you guys and gals, and when you take that information and you process 50% of your claims not being at fault. In the old days, it was pretty hard to retain a driver that got into an accident, whether it was his fault or not. You had no way to test it. And in this case, you can preserve that job, preserve that driver's career, and everyone's better off for it. And obviously, the results speak for themselves. And it transitions into the next part of this slide, which is know, build, and articulate your story. Because if you take the example I just gave you, if you don't think that had an impact on the renewal, the collateral discussion, and everything else, you're missing the boat. All of those factors and all that information, when we were able to do a timeline and say, hey, here's when we implemented this, and here was the next 18, 24, 36 months of results, we made a lot of headway and helped the underwriter process the the future and the success of the program that they had implemented. And to get to that next part, this is all about telling your story. And, you know, this is about the approach to handling your renewal and getting everything in line. And some people, as I mentioned earlier, are passive. Others are very active. And I rest assured, the active participants are the ones that are winning in the marketplace right now. And, you know, if you frame up the typical renewal process, and again, this is what most people see and most people do, and it's the piece of the iceberg above the water, is what I call the shotgun approach. You've got most of our industry runs out, grabs as much information from a trucking company as they can get, puts it all in an email, types up the losses or grabs the loss runs and sends it to as many underwriters as they possibly can, as fast as they can, to beat the competition to the market. And what we do and what we focus on, and what I'm going to kind of, you know, ask everyone else to consider, is taking a much different approach and a much more thoughtful approach. Get really deep into the details. Get really good at crafting your story and understanding what your story is. You know, we spend a lot of time providing benchmarks and knowing where you sit in the marketplace and what your negotiating power is. We spend a lot of time looking at the data and the analytics and trying to create that pro forma, that projection of what your costs and all the investments you've made are going to do, and everyone that's going to benefit from that. The people that do this well clearly stand out from the crowd and get much better results. And, you know, I think about just some easy things for everyone to consider. Right now, there's a lot of insurance professionals, underwriters, risk managers, everybody that are working remote. You know, I would encourage you to consider a virtual meeting, and it's a relationship business. You should know who your partners are. If you haven't, you want to get out and meet them or have them meet you, whether it's virtually or in person. We've done videos, we've done testimonials, we've done virtual tours where we grab a fleet and we do a 6, 8, 10-minute video that highlights all the investments they've made, highlights the executive team, the CFO, the president, the safety director, interviews the drivers and lets them talk about the culture of the place, the equipment, the facilities. There's a huge opportunity to differentiate yourself. And in a marketplace right now where more people are shopping their insurance than ever before, underwriters are overwhelmed. And you've got to figure out a way to get their attention and get your file to the top of their pile and make it a focus. Here's the next slide. You know, Ken hit on quite a bit of stuff regarding captives, so I won't regurgitate a lot of the some of the same thoughts. But my message here is to leverage all the options and put everything on the table. You know, when you've got circumstances like we have, a lot of these options are always good, no matter what the marketplace is. But now more than ever, it makes sense to make sure you're looking at everything. And if you're investing in the technology and you're doing everything that we just talked about, it's probably a pretty good time to take on a little bit more risk and reap some of the rewards and benefits for taking on that risk. Do deductible analysis. Look at what you can get comfortable with and where you see the future of your claims going, and with all of the tools that you've implemented. And I'll tell you, many of the most successful fleets are betting on themselves and aligning with programs or groups that complement their company. And if you look at this chart, I told you I was going to show you the difference between what we're talking about, which is, it's a little bit different timeline, but average increases since 2008, 2011, whatever timeline you want to use, being over 40%, versus the control group that we work with that's done an amazing job at a lot of the stuff that we talked about and it's tested everything that we're talking about today. Seeing a 4% change is incredible. And that's where I talk about the gap widening significantly, and the people that are all in, reaping the benefits, and candidly, the folks that you aren't hearing, you know, complain about the renewals, and the folks that are kind of pounding the drum for a lot of the programs that we talk about, that we highlight. And then you get into the captives and different options, deductibles, whatever it might be. It's not for everyone, but for those that fit, there's nothing better, right? And you got to make sure that you qualify and look into who you're partnering with. You want to make sure they're like-minded in quality. You know, there's a lot of different groups out there. It's very, 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 very important to make sure that you're vetting out all the options and testing and looking at the results of any of those groups that you're evaluating in different programs that you look at. And then the last bullet on here, and Ken, this may open up, Don, for some of the feedback and panel questions later, but just a few nuggets. You know, obviously culture is wildly important. It starts at the top and permeates throughout the organization. Speed, you know, I think back to 2008, 9, and 10 when fuel prices were skyrocketing, and you looked at all the fleets that turned down the trucks and governed speed, and there was a ton of money to be saved on fuel, but we studied this, and there was also a tremendous amount of money saved on claims. Every study we look at says speed is a factor in claim severity, claim frequency, all the above, and it's something that everybody needs to pay attention to and be disciplined with. Operations, you know, this gets into the states that you do business in. I've got customers that measure their shippers and the lanes that they're in, the states they have to operate in. You've got judicial hellholes. You've got all kinds of different jurisdictions that have an impact on the claims that you're going to have and the cost that you're going to incur. And this goes as far as, you know, I've got a client that designed a trailer, invented their own trailer to facilitate a safer workplace for their employees and drive down work comp costs well over 50%. It's incredible what the results have been, but put all options on the table and think about what you can do to control your own destiny. The drivers, you know, Joe hit on this earlier, quality of drivers, the training around the drivers. You know, I don't think there's any secret out there that as drivers have become harder to find, people have compromised on what their criteria is. And we all know what happens when you put the wrong seat in the truck. And you look at, you can't outrun the revenue of that truck enough with the impact that claims has on your expenses and your insurance and your costs. And then the last bullet here is on contracts. Wildly important. This could be a section in its own, but oftentimes we see a company with a salesperson that has the authority to sign and execute all the contracts, and really they might not be thinking about the bigger picture and the rights that they're waiving, the additional insurance status they get, the waivers of subrogation. You know, Matt talked about earlier the importance of subrogation, the amount of money that's there, and if you're waiving that right, it has an incredible impact on not only your business, but to the insurance company partner that you work with. And then this goes as far as limits. You know, I had an example late last week with a fleet that said, hey, I need to raise my umbrella by $5 million to comply with the contract that we signed. And I know that we have several fleets doing business with the same person at half those limits. So being able to lean on an expert that can help you do the benchmarking again, be cognizant of what's actually required, and be able to push back and actively negotiate those contracts, especially when they need drivers and trucks to move their freight in very, very busy times. It's a lot easier to have success there. With that, I'll hand it back, Don, and say thank you again and how much I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Chris, for your insights. You put a finer point on some of the common themes that we've heard from some of the other presenters. If you go to the last slide, we promised 10 actions listed as takeaways. I won't talk about these in deference to the time that we have, but I'm sure that you picked up on the common themes of settling claims early, investing in technology, developing a safety action plan, being able to know and articulate your plan, and run perhaps some battle drills in worst case scenarios if you should be involved in one of those. So at this point, I know that I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sue. I know we don't have time for questions, but I'm confident that our friends at SmartDrive will respond to any questions that have been received directly to whoever posed the questions. So, Sue, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Don. Again, thank you to you. Thank you to all of our panelists. We did have, I think we have time at least for maybe for one question, and then we can wrap up. And if you have any questions and you want to submit them, you can still send those in if you click on the ellipse, and we will get those to SmartDrive and our panelists so they can get back with you. But there was one question that came in. Joe talked about camera technology. I'd like to know what our panelists think of motor carriers that are only using front-facing cameras rather than front and inward.
Who wants to jump on that grenade?
Well, it's Joe Darby here, so since I brought it up earlier, I'll be quick while the other guys are thinking. I'd say it's a double. You know, it's good to have the camera, to have that technology. It's a good recording device, but to get that home run, it needs to be driver-facing, and you need to be doing something with the data to get that full credit.
Yeah, and this is Chris Vogel. You know, I would echo some of the same thoughts, and this might be anecdotal, but we all learn from real life experiences. And I can tell you that I'd rather have more information than less. And you've got some experiences and claim scenarios or claim examples, you know, where we had a very bad accident and no one knew what the driver was doing, and people start to make stuff up. And the plaintiff attorney is allowed to make stuff up, get into a really bad spot. And on the flip side, we've had some terrible accidents where we know exactly what the driver was doing, which, you know, was a fine piece of driving, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I believe that knowing that saved our backside significantly. And, you know, it also gets back to the one point about having the technology and leveraging the coaching and monitoring the events. Again, being able to identify where you've got problems and bad habits and good habits and reinforce them and praise the good habits, I think is wildly important.
Yeah, this is Ken Crippen. I would say the best technologies are those technologies that change driver behavior and reduce accidents. And the only way to really change driver behavior is through coaching. And we support video technology through direct subsidies to the vendors, and the subsidies for rear-facing, inward-facing programs are more because of the value they bring to the table. So I advocate both forward and inward-facing cameras.
This is Matt, and I'd like to echo some of the comments here as well. And obviously there's some varying opinions here and there as far as driver-facing and forward-facing. One thing I'd like to add in addition to the comments the gentleman made is if you do have driver-facing cameras, make sure that you do use that for coaching opportunities rather than just storing the data, maybe not acting on it. So continue to use that as an opportunity to help coach and improve your fleet.
Great, thank you very much. We are at the end of our program today, and I'd like to thank all of you who attended today's webinar. Again, and thanks to SmartDrive for sponsoring this, but just an excellent information-packed hour. And if you know of someone who wanted to attend today's program but was unable to do so, or if you'd like to go back and review any or all of today's program, we will have that available on our webinar archive page at www.ttnews.com. Thanks again for attending, and have a great day.